Can faith exist without certainty? I think faith, the very essence of faith, is for it to be a safe haven for us in a world where there is no certainty. So, yes, faith can exist without certainty, but it's not just that. Faith actually exists because there is no certainty. But when we talk about certainty, I think there are better questions that we can consider. Questions that I think are more important than the question of faith existing without certainty. I think we should be considering instead things like why we seek certainty. Are we seeking certainty through faith because we fear autonomy, agency? And then also, what kind of person can exist meaningfully without certainty? These are the questions. I feel like they are better questions for us to consider and meditate on. But before we go there, I like highlight quickly say there are other aspects of our life where we are certain about. Things like uh impermanence, the fact that we're not gonna live here forever, the fact that we are mortal beings, those aspects of our life, things like our dependence on food and water for survival. Those things are very certain. Unless we start to use batteries tomorrow, those things are pretty much set in stone. So there is some certainty in those aspects. But in the context of faith, which is what we are discussing, the certainty that we are looking for is tied to meaning, right? We are trying to look for a meaning for our existence. So we define some kind of interpretation, some kind of explanation for life. Everything what we see for this life, we are looking for an explanation for it, right? An explanation that creates structure, a structure within which we can now build our life, a structure within which we can find meaning, a structure within which we can find purpose. You know, Within that structure, we can choose a career that aligns, we can choose partners that align, even as far as the way we look, as far as the way we dress, we can choose all these things within this structure. So it's that kind of structure, that kind of meaning, that kind of explanation for life that we are looking for in the context of certainty through faith. You get so now make we go back to those questions and I feel like say we need to focus more on, which is, are we choosing certainty through faith because we fear agency, autonomy, right? And then what kind of a person can exist meaningfully without certainty? So on the first one, autonomy, agency, normally they refer to us taking responsibility for our lives. Now, in the context of faith or in the context of life in relation to faith, it is asking us to study life for ourselves, you know, and then come up with our own resolutions for what is true and how we should live, right? Which is the structure that faith gives us. Whichever faith it is we are choosing, that's the kind of structure it gives us. What is true, how to live. But if we choose agency, autonomy over faith, then we'll be required to go into life and study it for ourselves rather than adopting anything that has been, premeditated by someone else or constructed before our own existence. We have to face life ourselves and take in all this information and study them and then come up with resolutions. for what we think is true and how we think we should live. There is a lot of responsibility that comes with that. It takes a lot of work to do that. So I think it is something that is worth meditating on. Are we choosing faith? Are we choosing certainty? Because we fear this kind of work, we fear this kind of autonomy, we fear taking agency for our own lives because of the amount of work that is required to go in that direction. Right. And then the second question, what kind of person can exist meaningfully without certainty? I think it's the kind of person who prioritizes truth over comfort or safety, right? Because when systems are popular already and when they've been existing for a long time, then there are structures and systems that have already been built around those systems. And then if you come along and you're trying to choose new systems, it means that you are going into a world where there are no structures already made, where there are no systems already made, right? So there will either be a conflict, trying to exist as this person or trying to exist on the basis of what you believe while living in these systems that were created on the basis of something else. So it is a discomforting, you know, place to be. It's not a very safe choice to make. So the kind of person that will exist meaningfully or that can exist meaningfully without certainty would be a person who prioritizes the truth over comfort and safety. A person who would rather live with the consequences of the truth than accept a comfortable lie or accept an idea that has not been thoroughly investigated. They rather stick to the truth than accept something that is a comfortable lie or a popular concept that has not been thoroughly investigated, at least to their own satisfaction. I think that is the kind of person that will be comfortable, you know, existing meaningfully without certainty. This conversation, for some reason, more than the other conversation, really they remind me of part of what I set out to do, which is to hold up mirrors for us rather than come up with very strict um, ideas for us to live by, right? Mostly hold up mirrors, and then in other cases, just share ideas as my own personal perspectives and personal views rather than this is how I think we should all live, right? Even though I think that might still happen sometimes. But yeah, this conversation really reminds me more to hold up mirrors more often than not. So these are the two things and I feel like say we need to meditate on, take good think about be as objective as we can be when we answer those questions. Don't be defensive and really try to get to the bottom of ourselves and realize what our motivations are in relation to these issues. Are we choosing certainty through faith because we fear autonomy and the agency? And then what kind of person can exist meaningfully without certainty. So these are my thoughts on this matter. I believe I'm here on this level of self-reflection. Make everybody take time, go reflect on by themselves, and I will see you for the next video.